Good morning, everyone. There are a lot of you registered this morning, so there'll be a lot of pinging as people enter from the lobby. We're just going to let that happen for a moment or so that everyone can join us. Great to see so many people here interested in this topic as well. So welcome to this Australian Farm Institute and AgriFutures webinar on blueprinting agriculture's role in the Australian economy. I'm Katie McRobert. I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Farm Institute. I'm joining you this morning from Darug and Gundagara land in the Blue Mountains. So welcome to all of you on whichever country you're joining us from. Before we get into the details about what we want to talk about today and the work that we want to demonstrate to you, I'm going to ask Simon Vincent from AgriFutures to share a few thoughts on why this work is so important to both our organisations. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Katie. And look, we're really pleased to be involved in the work and in partnership with the Australian Farm Institute. So my name's Simon Vincent, General Manager of Rural Futures at AgriFutures Australia, where we lead cross-sectoral research that supports the long-term strength of Australian agriculture. The webinar today, the project is in relation to a project that AgriFutures Australia has initiated and we're delivering with our partners, the Australian Farm Institute. Over the last couple of days, the Minister announced at the ABARES Outlook Conference that the sector's reached a very important milestone, $100 billion in farm gate output. So that achievement reflects the productivity, innovation and resilience of Australian farmers. But farm gate value only tells part of the story. Australia's contribution to agriculture's contribution to Australia extends far beyond production leaving the farm. The sector underpins a wide network of processing, transport, logistics, finance, research, manufacturing and export markets, supporting regional communities and national economic activity. Yet, in national economic debates, agriculture is often reduced to a small set of headline indicators such as GDP share, employment or farm gate production. These are useful measures, but they do not fully capture the scale of agriculture's broader economic role. And that matters because how agriculture is measured influences how it is prioritised in policy, investment and national reform discussions. So that's why AgriFutures has initiated this research. The aim is to strengthen the evidence base around agriculture's economic contribution, particularly across value chains and enabling industries beyond the farm gate. The discussion paper being presented by the Australian Farm Institute today is an important step in that process. It examines how agriculture's contribution is currently being measured, explores alternative approaches used internationally, and considers how a more complete picture of agriculture's economic footprint could support broader policy discussions. Importantly, this work is not about redefining GDP or replacing existing measures. It's about improving the evidence base that informs how agriculture's contribution is understood in national decision-making. We're starting that conversation today, and your feedback, there's almost 300 of you, at least on this webinar, will be critical in helping strengthen and shape the next piece of work. The goal here is simple, yet ambitious, I guess, Katie, to ensure agriculture's full economic contribution is better understood and better reflected in policy, investment and national debate. So thanks very much again, and we'll hand over to Katie and Christy and the team to take us through the discussion paper. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Simon. So Simon's laid out very neatly there what our objectives are in undertaking this work. Blueprinting ag's role in the Australian economy is a very bold thing to call it. We know that this is the start of quite a fairly ambitious and hopefully significant piece of work. Very pleased to be working with AgriFutures on this. It's a topic the Australian Farm Institute's been involved in for a very long time. We're also very pleased for the extremely strong support that we've had from ABARES and from the ABS in undertaking this work and think about how we can do different forms of measurement or just communicate the measurement differently to make sure that we're all making good contributions to that policy that we know needs to underpin the economic and social well-being of Australian farmers. So this is part of a broader scope of work, this particular discussion paper we're going to look at today. Agriculture's economic contribution beyond GDP. The objectives of that work are to look at those strong linkages that Simon's outlined for you there, understand that comprehensive value of Australian agriculture to our overall economy. We're looking at a more accurate and comprehensive picture. We're going to be developing some policy recommendations out of this piece of work, which is the overall work is going through to mid-year, mid-2026. But we know that there'll be more work to do beyond that with ABARES and ABS, as well as Treasury and other decision makers in DAF and beyond in other departments as well. And we're also seeking to get some sectoral insights to look at a detailed analysis of how those different sectors and services contribute to our GDP and our other measures of economic value, so that we can consider some targeted strategies for growth and development. So we want to make sure we really emphasise this is not about replacing the measures that we use today. This is about complementing the really robust measures that we already know and love. We're talking about that broader view of our economic footprint and considering how that can improve policy design, especially when we consider those big challenges facing the sector at the moment around productivity, about development in the regions, about sustainability, resilience and adaptability as well. We also want to discuss with you today as a cohort of people joining our webinar. And as Simon said, we've had almost 300 people register. It's good to see more than 100 of you online today. And hopefully a few will be able to be watching this recording afterwards. We want to get your feedback on how we make some of those judgments about inclusion and exclusion of economic activities to balance that analytical rigor. Having some very robust conversations with an excellent advisory committee for this project as well. But the more feedback we get on this, the better, to make sure we're accurately representing what the industry considers is important. And also thinking about what metrics and measures should be used to track progress against broader themes. So that's what the discussion paper covers. The program of work is going to cover a whole lot more in a lot of detail, but the discussion paper itself is pretty chunky, and I'm going to hand over now to Christy Barber to take you through some of the issues brought up in that discussion paper so that we can get your feedback today. Thank you, Christy.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks, Simon. So I'm Christy Barber. I'm the research program coordinator at the AFI. And so I'll just start with, let's define the problem. And so currently, agriculture's economic contributions are communicated through these headline figures like GVP and GDP. And kind of like so what Simon mentioned, this week we heard that the industry has hit its $100 billion goal 4 years early. And hitting the goal is definitely something to celebrate, and it reflects the overall strength of the industry. But as we're approaching 2030 and we're moving beyond this $100 billion target, it's a really good time to reflect on how these traditional metrics like farm gate output or GDP only communicate part of agriculture's value to Australia. And so in the industry, we know agriculture has a really nuanced contribution to the economy. And so when we look and use traditional measures like GDP percentage, employment, or output, it can mask some of agriculture's really layered economic and social contributions, especially in regional communities. And so if we think about Australian agribusinesses, the ABS said in 2023, there's about 88,000 agribusinesses, each of which, we think about those, each of those engage, rely, and support industries outside of agricultural production. And the economic success of those businesses that agriculture supports directly supports other industries like transportation, construction, and manufacturing. And it also supports some of those service activities like finance, research, and innovation. So if we think about this ecosystem of the agricultural, if you think about the agricultural ecosystem, there's many cross-sector linkages, meaning that agricultural production contributes to the economic value beyond the farm gate. And so we know, of course, that different metrics tell a different story to decision makers in the wider community, but it can be quite startling to see some of the headline figures lined up beside each other. So Australian agriculture GDP Australian agriculture contributes a modest share of GDP, and it employs a small and declining workforce. And if you look at these pie charts, it makes ag look a bit insignificant compared to some of the other sectors around Australia. However, ag is a major user of our national water resources, and 74% is a statistic that actually feels really significant. And despite being really highly export oriented, agriculture accounts for just over 10% of our total exports. But ag occupies a very large physical footprint. And that's a statistic that pushes the industry back into significant territory for policy people. And those metrics that were on the slide before and the ones that are listed here, they're often used as proxies for industry's performance and scale and importance in policy discussions and in decision making. However, each method does not necessarily capture an industry's full economic dynamic. Different industry scale and structure can shape some of the economic significance within the Australian economy. And this is not a critique of these measurements. As Katie mentioned, we're not looking to replace any of these, we're looking to complement them. And so when you look at these separately, they really do not tell the full picture. They're best understood when they're used together, as it provides a bit more context since each metric answers a different question about scale, performance, or contribution. And if we go back to that $100 billion target and use that as an example, farm gate output, or GVP, is the price farmers receive when they sell their products in the market. It's comprehensive of farm gate output. So that includes the value of input like chemicals or seeds. And so high GVP does not always translate to high farm income. And so it's actually best understood with other metrics like income or productivity. And then we also need to understand how agriculture is defined within these metrics. If we use the same GVP example, it actually doesn't include any value for those products after the first point of sale. So any value add that is captured and generated upstream is actually not captured in agriculture's economic contributions. And so most of these metrics listed here actually take a really narrow view of agriculture production. And so many of these metrics that we've just gone over, GVP, GDP, income, employment, they're reported through official statistic channels like through ABS, and they depend on ANZIC classifications to define what is agriculture. And if you look at the graphic here, it's a very simplified version of the ANZIC classification for ag, fisheries, and forestry. But this division actually captures primarily production-focused activities. So this is things like growing crops, raising animals, growing and harvesting timber, harvesting fish. So it takes a really narrow view of production. But you'll see at the bottom of the graphic, there is a little subdivision that includes some support services. And without listing every support service that is there, it really focuses mainly on agricultural production support services. So kind of things like shearing, cotton ginning, spraying, and mustering. But it's important to understand that it actually excludes any of those services that are contracted through things like labor hire. So that actually falls under a different ANZIC classification, and it isn't captured in agriculture's total contribution. And there's some other examples of that, like veterinarian services and agricultural research that are captured in other divisions as well. And so these divisions also separate upstream and downstream activities that depend on agricultural production as well. And so if we're thinking about the ABS and how they report their statistics around GDP and other things, they actually use very similar classifications to collect and report industry information like the ANZIC codes within their system of national accounts. So when you see the headline GDP number for agriculture, it's applying this really narrow view of agriculture production. And we know that modern agriculture businesses actually look very different to what's defined here. And so this is also to say that we're not criticizing the ANZIC classification. We don't think it should be changed. We actually think the ANZIC codes serve a really specific purpose, and they're utilized to collect statistical information. And it is really important that we are able to distinguish these activities. And it also allows us to have comparable international statistics, because a lot of countries around the globe apply a set of agreed international standards to collect this information like GDP. But if we're considering how agriculture operates in the Australian economy, we're actually missing some really important linkages, and therefore we could be misrepresenting agriculture's contributions. So I'm going to just stop there for a second, and I think we'll take a temperature check. I'll get Katie to post up a poll, and we'll just see who do you think holds responsibility for changing the way we measure agriculture's economic contributions. And I'll just give everyone a couple of seconds, and then I'll move on.
And just checking that people can see that poll turning up there. If you can't, just drop me a note in the chat. We can see it. We haven't done this before. No, it's getting some results there, so I'm sure people can see it.
Okay.
That's great.
If you can't see it on your screen, have a look in the chat. It might be there as well. Okay, so when we're looking at measuring agriculture's contribution, if we're not going to change the ANZIC classifications, then how are we able to actually, take this broader view of agriculture's contributions around the economy? And you're able to do that by using that statistical information that the ABS publishes. But when we start applying these thresholds about what's in and what's out, we really need to have evidence and informed judgment when making these decisions. So we need to make clear calls on where ag starts and when it stops, and what depends on agriculture to exist, and to what extent if it does. And so, here's a really simplified graphic of an ag value chain. And I'm sure, on some farms, this is actually not as complex. I mean, it's actually more complex than what's presented here. And so when we look internationally, we can see some really clear examples of these judgment calls. I've listed just a couple of international examples, but I would like to say before we get into how they communicate ag's GDP, that all of these countries follow the same set of standards that Australia does when it comes to officially reporting and recording those statistics. It's because that it makes it, easy for us to compare data across borders. But what they do differently is these governments actually communicate the value of agriculture outside of these official channels within different government departments very differently to Australia. So these countries use that national account data, like I was mentioning, and they aggregate it, or they undertake value add analysis to produce statistics that reflect the realities of primary production systems. And so if we look at New Zealand, the US, and the EU, they actually communicate agricultural production within value chain frameworks. We'll take the US for an example to kind of zoom into. So the US includes other sectors like manufacturing, retail, and restaurants as part of ag shared GDP, because these industries directly rely on agriculture as inputs. So if you were to look at farm production along in the US, it actually makes up less than 1% of GDP share in the US. And then if you compare the EU, New Zealand, and the US to our GDP share, you can tell that boundary choices can produce very different results. And so if we position agriculture as this integral part of a whole instead of a discrete sector, you can communicate and understand its linkages within economies, because it's better represented, and you able to get some policy relevant data and insights on some of those key connection points and impact. And also, when we come back to Australia, it's not new, kind of expanding these boundary choices. So Australia policy discussions already use different measurements and frameworks to capture and analyze economic activities that span across sectors, supply chains, and some broader societal outcomes. So I've pulled 3 examples of this here. The CSIRO's Towards a State of the Food System report describes agriculture as an important part of Australia's broader food system. And so if we look at that food system as the CSIRO has defined it, it actually generates 8 times the value of agricultural production alone and supports a workforce 52 times larger. And, this food system that they've defined it contributes to the economy and also shapes sustainability, health outcomes, and social equity, which is really relevant for the next example, which is Treasury's Measuring What Matters Wellbeing framework, which is developed to track progress towards a more healthy, secure, sustainable, cohesive, and prosperous Australia. So 5 themes. And inclusion and equity and fairness are also cross-cutting dimensions of this framework. And then finally, the ABS actually produces what they call a satellite account for the tourism industry. And so this is because they recognize that the tourism industry's actually economic contributions are beyond those direct activities, and it spans across multiple industries, and it's not accurately captured by a single classification. And so they actually use an internationally recognized method to measure tourism's contribution to GDP, consumption, and employment to develop this tourism satellite account. And so then they're able to trace demand for tourism-related goods and services across the economy, rather than just having that single ANZAC industry. And so we'll use the workforce as a case study to kind of see how applying different boundaries can give you different results and where the challenges might be. And so we will use ABARES. They released a report in 2024 defining the agriculture workforce. And this report aimed at the time to provide high-level definitions of the agriculture workforce to guide future work in this area. I do think it's probably something that in ag we always kind of ask with how agribusinesses are shaped today. They're very different. And so who is actually considered the ag workforce now? And so ABARES points out that there's no agreed definition of the agriculture workforce, but it's often only considered to be those who work on farm. And a lot of the employment data that is collected for Australia does use that ANZAC classification as a point of reporting. And so ABARES identifies that there are many workers who support agriculture or work in the supply chain that may also be considered working in agriculture or agriculture support occupations that aren't actually captured. And so they define this broader workforce, or this workforce beyond the farm gate, as primary production, which is activities that produce food and fiber before processing or distribution. And it includes things like cultivating, propagating crops and plants, breeding and maintaining livestock. The next one is agriculture support. This is defined as activities that assist primary production or help run an agricultural enterprise. This includes things like agronomy and veterinary services for crops and animal management, as well as business services such as agricultural advisory and marketing. The next is processing. That's activities that convert raw materials into food products for consumption. It includes things like cutting, cleaning, slaughtering, milk processing, and packing. And then the last one is distribution and storage. And so these are activities that move and store agricultural products in raw or semi-processed forms. And it includes things like transport and warehousing. So after ABARES has defined what this broader workforce could consist of, they're actually able to then find where they can get this data to actually quantify who works in agriculture. However, they note that there are 2 groups of workers that are really hard to capture. And one is workers who are included in official statistics because of residency or visa status. And the other group are the occupations that support the agriculture workforce, but are captured in other industries. So this is really similar to that challenge that we previously described with the ANZAC classification system. So as an example, again, the labor hire companies that provide a lot of essential services to farms, they're actually captured under administration and support services. Another example are truck drivers. So in ABARES definition, that would be they would fall under distribution and storage. But we all know that truck drivers, they actually support many industries in the economy. Other examples, again, is like veterinarians and also some ag research occupations that aren't captured. And so if we can use these definitions they actually provide a really good starting point for us to consider what can be included within an updated agriculture boundary. And if you think about using this for the workforce and how you're, able to better quantify the number of people, it actually helps identify, workforce trends. It informs government policy, and it assists understanding worker needs for skills and education pathways. So if you kind of apply, this broader workforce lens into kind of calculating your economic contribution from agriculture, you can also start identifying some of those gaps in policy and understanding trends more, and actually identifying some target areas for investment and impact. Actually, we'll do another poll now, Katie. Hopefully everyone got to see that one last time. What economic activities or linkages do you think should be better recognized when assessing agriculture's contribution to the economy? Give you a second to vote, and we just have a couple more slides left, and then we can hear from you in the Q&A session. So recognizing that the limitations of traditional economic measures, a dashboard approach is something that could be really complement traditional measures and provide a more holistic understanding of economic, social, and environmental conditions. However, successful dashboards rely on selecting and collating the right themes and metrics to properly convey agriculture's long-term contributions. And here we've provided a snapshot of the Treasury's Measuring What Matters dashboard. So they take a dashboard approach and they use 12 dimensions and 50 indicators to monitor and track that progress against the 5 well-being themes that I mentioned earlier. And so if we think outside of these expanded metrics, if outside of things that capture like social and environmental contributions from agriculture, you could also use the dashboard to communicate that broader agricultural contribution and that agri-food system value. The dashboard can include layers of that system and demonstrate the critical linkage of agriculture to other parts of the value chain in the Australian economy. And so just to wrap up, some key points: current measures underrepresent how agriculture actually functions in the economy, and headline ag matters more than what headline measures suggest. Measurement choices shape what is visible and not visible in policy discussion. Systems-based views better reflects modern agriculture's economic role. And lastly, better measurement equals better decisions. And so just before we move on to the Q&A part, I just wanted to quickly outline some of the next steps for the research program. So in the discussion paper, you'll see in the appendix, there's a map of ANZIC codes against the agricultural value chain. This is not a conclusion, and it's not something that we're necessarily using exactly in our next steps of the project. It was really a way to understand particularly the complexities of the ANZIC codes and how they fit into that value, the agricultural value chain. But we will be making some boundary choices, and this is going to require judgment, discipline, and lots of transparency when we make these decisions on cutoffs. And it's something that, we would like to talk to you about today. And so in terms of the economic analysis, we'll be doing input, output, and value add analysis to trace some of these linkages and present how value is created across the economy. And lastly, we'll be doing policy recommendations, case studies, and scenario modeling to ground these learnings in real-world applications. So we do have one more poll before we get into the Q&A discussion. What policy areas could be improved by a comprehensive understanding of agriculture's linkages? And I believe Katie will...
It is just loading, just one second.
That's okay.
There we go. It's taking its time.
Perfect.
Should be able to see that now. Sorry, Christy.
That's okay. And so I'll just stop sharing my screen so I can actually see some of these poll results.
And we might leave this one up a minute longer and see if we can get a few extra responses as well. But it's been really good to take the temperature of the room as we go through and see what people are thinking as we go through. And yes, you can select multiple. Please don't select all because that's the easy way out.
We had about 66 responses on this one so far.
It's pretty good. Yeah, we might we can just leave that open in the chat there if you want to go back and have a look. But yeah, opening up to your questions now. And thanks, Christy, for that presentation. Very good. So there are a few things in Q&A. I'm just checking to see if people are asking in the chat, which I know people always do, even if we ask them to go to Q&A. We'll go to the Q&A first, though. And there's a question there. I'm just going to go from the ones I can see. From Sue Ogilvie. Hi, Sue. Good to have you on. With agriculture managing around 55% of the land and consuming 70% of the water, have we considered, as part of this project, applying the SEEA to this project? And Sue expects that application of the CEA, the CF, EA and AE would help to show a more complete picture of the contribution and its value to the economy. Sue, I'm also just going to see if we can get you off. I know that in webinars like this, it's a bit tricky, but if we can get you to come off mute and have a chat about that too, that'd be quite interesting. Let me just see if I can find you there. I can allow your mic and I can allow your camera. So if you want to, you jump into the conversation, but also Christy and Simon, your first thoughts on Sue's comments on the CEA.
I think it's definitely at this point something that we can have a look at and how we might be able to apply it. I think with the input-output analysis, there is always some kind of limitations in terms of how you're able to actually apply some of or dictate some of this boundaries. I think, yeah, we can have a look to see how the analysis might fit together or how it might complement some of the metrics in the dashboard.
It's a common
question that comes
yeah,
up
that's
every
right.
time,
And
right?
I think this is it. It's you could go as kind of broad as you want with this, and so I think we'll have to work with the AFI team to sort of work through where do we want to put the boundary on this. As with lots of research programs, we do sometimes the projects lead to other projects because of simply there's other interesting questions that have come up. So that could be one that we sort of look at. If it's not in this project specifically, it could be something we look to augment in something in the future.
Thanks, Simon. And Brian's question in the Q&A is quite similar about the current measures not recognising social or cultural values of communities having access to fresh food, which is something we heard a lot about for those of us who attended ABARES Outlook this week. There's a lot of discussion around food security. Brian, you're right, that is a significant indicator. So we'll get the team's thoughts on that, but also if people want to post their own thoughts in the chat as well. Again, a scope question. We're not pretending that we can do everything within this project. We want to do as much as we can. We want to make this meaningful. But what we're describing this project as is opening the door to a lot of future conversations. And to be frank, a lot of these conversations have been happening for some time behind closed doors in some of the official organisations, official statistics gatherers, and they are looking for an evidence base they can present back to help them make different decisions as well. But we've got somebody too, Chrissy, on our advisory committee. I'm not sure if she's joined us today, who talks a lot about social and cultural values of communities and access to fresh food. But would you like to comment on that one?
Yeah, for sure. So like Cody mentioned, there are, and Simon mentioned as well, sometimes these projects open doors to other things. I think when we start thinking about the dashboard metrics and themes that we would want to capture in terms of agriculture's full contribution, I think access to food, like food security in general, I think that actually, is a really something that we should, consider, and that will be thought about how we might be able to include that and what kind of metric, how can you actually measure it as well. Like, it's one thing to say it's great to have and to represent the dashboard, but then another thing to actually measure that access. And so I think it is a significant indicator. I think it's priorities of the government, priorities of the sectors as well, to strengthen food security and have access to fresh food. And I think if we're thinking about Treasury's wellbeing framework, it aligns with that really well. So I don't think it's something that we will be able to apply an economic analysis as this part of this project, but I think it is something that we can potentially look at and recommend as in terms of a potential metric in the future for the industry.
Yeah,
I'll-
and there
I'll
will
mention-
definitely be, oh, sorry, Simon.
No, you go, Katie.
I
I'll
was
jump
just going
after.
to add that there'll definitely be commentary on that in the report as well. We won't be able to do the analysis within the scope and the timing that we have, but we certainly will be adding some commentary because we're getting a lot of really good and very specific feedback from some experts on this as well. So we're trying to make sure that gets into the report, even if it's not part of the economic analysis. And we know, of course, that the Australian Ag Sustainability Framework has, an equal number of principles on social sustainability as well as economic viability as well as environmental responsibility. So, Simon, sorry to
Look, I would encourage you to join the federal government's got the food security strategy, a whole series of consultation at the moment, and so I've put in the chat. They're doing sort of all over the country to talk about how they're starting to build their food security strategy, and at the ABS conference, certainly the social elements of food security came through pretty broadly. So yeah, really encourage you to get along to one of those as well.
And there's a point in the chat that I want to come back to, but just before we do that, in the Q&A, question from Pip Grant. Hi, Pip. Nice to have you online as well. Which is a question, Christy, you've been spending a lot of time trawling through tables and looking at boundaries. How would most of the people on this webinar and what we consider people in the industry or activities be currently classified under the measures that we use today?
But there's some parts that I am still getting my head around and talking to ABS about different activities and where they fall. But and part of that is levy. So where do the RDCs fall? Is it if they're levy funded, do they fall under that government pillar, or if are they considered agricultural research? I'm not quite sure on that one yet. But if we think about memberships, I'm pretty sure those memberships industries are captured in a category called other services. That's at the very end within the ABS's national accounts, and some of the commercial customers. So if you're thinking processors, they, depending on what kind of manufacturer you are, it would be, as a whole, it's captured under the manufacturing division, which I believe is division B. But in the national account, it breaks some of that manufacturing up. And so in processing, so yeah, depending like what kind of customer you are, if it's meat, you might be in the meat processing, you might be in seafood processing and manufacturing and so on, leather and tan goods. So that it breaks it up a little bit that way, so you can see some of it. Part of that input-output analysis is we're doing a value add analysis, and naturally the way a value add analysis or value add works is that it was created. It's a statistical kind of term that was created to prevent double counting because it cancels out those intermediate inputs. But we do realize that once you start adding different parts of the economy together, you can potentially double count. I don't think we'll get away with it completely, but what we are doing is we are providing some really conservative thresholds to, I guess, claim is probably not the right word, but claim that dependency between ag and other sectors, like manufacturing and maybe retail and wholesale, stuff like that. And so by having that lower threshold, we're not just, if we just added value added across the economy, I think we would actually get more than the GDP of the country, which that's incorrect. And so we're being really transparent in our methodology and also taking a really conservative approach to what we're claiming as directly agriculture related and upstream and downstream.
There's a couple of questions in Q&A that I'm going to try and combine. One of them you've partially already answered, I think, Christy, on the differences between the different industries, grains, horticulture, livestock. But Manju and also Tushar have both brought up questions around export orientation and export centric for Australia. Of course, 70% of what we grow, both in value and now also pretty much in volume, goes overseas. How much thought are we giving to where that economic value in the broader sense is being generated downstream in our export destinations, particularly in the Asia Pacific? note from Tushar there about that not being within the Australia-centric scope. And yes, we'll go back to the scope boundaries, but wanting to get some idea of quantifying that broader value in a geopolitical context. And Chris, you've done a lot of the talking. Simon, have you given any of this any thought?
Well, look, I think this is always the challenge with these ones, is that there's just so much we can be putting in into here, and because I'm looking at a couple of the other bits in here around sort of taking a system approach, which links to that. You know, you've got AI, which is also going to disrupt and change the way that we are adding value in different sectors and industries. So I think this is we're really trying to take this as a foundational piece of work of which we can sort of continue to build off. But there's also seeing here around value adding. Yeah, it's good.
And I was going to call that out specifically too, Simon, that the AgriFutures is investing in some work on systems thinking, how agriculture connects to the broader system. We're very good in Australia at seeing agriculture in a silo, and we say repetitively, apparently, we should break out of silos, but we don't mean break out of agriculture. So it's a good challenge to all of us to make sure that we are thinking outside those silos, and looking forward to the work coming out of AgriFutures on that. I would say that's been a very strong theme in the food security discussions that I've certainly been part of. The AFI has got a farm policy journal coming up soon, next few weeks, I think, in fact, on food security issues, and talking about where that value goes in our food security. Obviously, domestically, we're quite secure in terms of producing plenty of calories, not necessarily secure in producing what we really need for nutrition. But a lot of the food security discussion around Australian agriculture talks about the security that we then pass along the chain to our neighbours, and that reliance. So I would say not necessarily in this scope of work, but as Simon said, foundational and can contribute to other work as well. And hopefully all of these things can gel together. There's also a note from Amanda. We hear a lot from industry that businesses are struggling with remaining economically viable. Some are looking to close, many are looking to close, she says. It would be great to see this project act as an advocacy piece for future-proofing the sector. I think that's something we're very invested in as well, Amanda. And from my perspective, you know, it's great to hear the news coming out this week that we're on track to hit 101 billion in GVP, well ahead of the 2030 target. It also masks to a fairly significant degree some of the unequal distribution of the value across the Australian agricultural economy, let alone the wider economy. We know that profitability distribution is largely at the top end of agricultural production. There are many smaller and mid-sized Australian farms that are really suffering with profitability issues at the moment. Margins are extremely tight. And that's one of the concerns, is that numbers like 101 billion sound great. And it also means that there's a lot of people out there who then take their foot off the gas and go, well, don't need to push on this anymore. Everybody's doing fine. We want to make sure that we can provide a much more complex and rich view of where support is needed, where intervention is needed, and where success should be celebrated.
And I'll just jump in there too, because it kind of goes to Manju's question around the export versus domestic. So what we're able to do when we do this analysis is it shows how agriculture and the way it's broken up into the ABS accounts, and we will be looking at aquaculture and forestry as well as part of this. I'm not sure if we were clear about that at the beginning, but just noting that now, so sorry. You're actually able to look at its forward and backward linkages, and the stronger forward and backward linkages it has, it's the more kind of impact, like so that sector has on other parts of the economy. And so if we're thinking about some of like these businesses closing and you know, you can kind of see where the strong links are and the weak links are. So that just helps with kind of those policy decisions. But with that as well, you're able to look at final demand, which shows exports, I'm pretty sure. And then we're able to also kind of separate imports out. And we can't get as granular as separating each industry, but we can do it within the groups that the ABS has defined. So we'll be able to kind of compare the export versus domestic market-oriented industries to a degree, but also we might find that even though it's really highly export oriented, it might still have really strong linkages domestically. And then compare that to other industries in Australia, and see how it compares to things like mining or construction. But the scenarios are all that thinking has just really started at this point with our advisory committee that we've been working with. That's something we've just started investigating. So I can't provide at this point too much detail of what that might model or what we might look at, but we definitely will be able to kind of reveal some information about the agriculture value chain and and try to find if there are differences in exports and domestic, and if so, what does that mean for industries within Australia?
And we mentioned that, right? We're very lucky to have a expert steering committee advisory group around it, including ABS and ABARES and CSIRO and the National Farmers Federation. So we're getting we've sort of brought together an Avengers, I guess, to sort of put, to make sure that we got the right experts who are guiding the work, coordinated obviously by AFI. So that would be a good one. We'll be put into our representative from ABS on that steering committee.
And there's a great point from Dave McEwen in the Q&A as well. Hi, Dave. Good to have you on board with us as well. Looking at, he asks, would looking at actual new and real value creation as a proportion of GDP, as example, primary production, agriculture, mining, international education, professional services, be a worthwhile exercise rather than just looking at the large parts of GDP that are actually government-funded services such as health, education, and defence? It's worthwhile, Dave suggests, to break down what parts of the economy are circling in funds within the economy, taxpayer funded, versus actual creation of new income from global sources, which makes me wonder if we've been all talking to the same person earlier this week, Dave, because we, the AFI team, actually had a really interesting conversation with the Queensland Food Farmers Commissioner, Rachel Chambers, just a couple of days ago on pretty much exactly that topic. And Rachel was pointing us to some work that we can look into further on that. Again, whether or not we can fit that into the economic modelling that we're undertaking in this project in the time we have is unlikely, but certainly with part of the narrative, because that's another one of those really important differentiators when you're talking about size of GDP and contribution to economies that people often misunderstand when they see those headline figures. Things popping up in the chat as well, and some people saying have to go, but thanks, which is nice. Also want to call out the breadth and depth of interest in this work and how impressed we are that there are so many people who want to be part of this work, and not only everybody tuning in from all across Australia, and great to have you with us, but we've talked about, Chrissy, for example, getting in touch with people in Canada to talk more in depth, and we've actually got the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute CEO tuning in live from his tractor outside Ottawa. So great to have interest from around the world in this, and hopefully we can make a really positive contribution back to these many very complex discussions and make some clear recommendations on where we can better advise policy in the future. If there's anybody who'd like to come off mute too, because I know the webinar keeps you kind of in a little box there, just put your hand up, raise your hand up, and I can unmute you and you can jump in for a chat. Otherwise, I am going to check the Q&A again. Oh, Manju, I'll see if I can find you in the list. It's a lot of people to work through. Allow mic and allow camera. Right, Manju, you should be able to unmute yourself now and ask a question.
Hi, thank you for unmuting. Thank you for the presentation as well. I was trying to type this in, but it was not finishing. I tried comparing the GRP, the million workers per, sorry, the number of workers per $1 million of GRP in mining, in regions where mining is the key propulsive sector and where agriculture is the key propulsive sector. And I found there is a good difference there. In mining regions, it's under 1 or 1.7, around those, along those lines, where Agriculture is the key propulsive sector. It was 4.7, 3.2 along those lines. I think that's an indication of the trickle-down effect. Not just the number of people employed. It's an indication of the trickle-down effect that agriculture is having.
Thank you. That's really interesting. We'll get in touch with us after this too. If you can share that work, it'll be really interesting for us to see some of the detail there.
Yeah, I will send it to you. I
appreciate that very much. It's one of the tricky things though too, when you think about share of employment, because people do like to talk about this as an economic indicator of success. Look how many people we employ. But we're also talking in agriculture about moving towards digitization, about, precision agriculture, decision agriculture, rather than just primary labor in agriculture. And if we're moving towards these more efficient systems, that also means fewer people employed directly in the sector, which then conversely can actually be seen as an indicator of success, that your employment numbers are going down. So it is all about how you interpret statistics. We're never going to be able to present a perfect system within which the way agriculture would like to be seen will always be seen by other people. And we certainly don't want to twist numbers to try and fabricate stories, but it is just really worth considering how the same number can be used to tell two incredibly different stories about an industry. I'd love to see your work, Manju. There's something popping back up in the Q&A, so I'll go back over there.
And I think that's a good point. This isn't, we're not driving at a particular outcome out of this work, because there's, but we want it to be an important evidence base for others to use. And so I think that, how others use the work, and we're obviously working closely with government and with NFF as they're both thinking about what we should be doing and our new target should be as a sector. But yeah, I think that's, we're excited to sort of see how people use this evidence base and data that we come up with in this project to do lots of different things with.
And there's a note from Dave Skutenko. I knew I was going to trip over that, Dave. Sorry about that. About a great way to show contribution of agriculture to people within Australia would be to compare two dinner plates, one provided with domestic agriculture and one for pure imports. That is actually something that some other countries do. They talk about share of plate. So that is something that we might also include in our narrative. Whether or not we do a very sophisticated economic analysis, I can't promise. And there is another question, Christy from Pip Grant, on more of a technical question. At what point are new commodities classified, e.g. carbon units grown by farmers? Just realised too, as I've thrown that to you, that's not something that's really come up in the work you've been doing, but I've got thoughts. Yet. So
okay.
All right.
So in terms, I don't know exactly about carbon units. I'm not quite sure how that is actually captured, but I don't want to make an assumption and get it wrong. But if I had to make a really just wild guess, I would say if it's something that a farmer is getting at the farm gate technically through his farm, then potentially it would, that value or that that is created from that carbon unit could potentially, I think it might be captured there. But like I said, I don't, that could be totally wrong. But some of the some of your niche commodities, I believe some of like the thoroughbred horses that are used for racing, I think they're actually not captured really specifically in the ag account. If I remember, it was one of the, some of your smaller ones are not neatly captured there. But
there is some parallel work that AFI's done a couple of years ago. It's sort of never quite seen the light of day for political reasons, but it was about helping to define the boundaries of who's called a farmer and who's not called a farmer. In at the time it was in New South Wales, but we did actually go a bit beyond scope for that one because it was just too interesting and we couldn't stop. You can imagine why. For political reasons, the people we were doing the work for said we'd rather not say who's not a farmer. So thank you for the work, and we will just have a think about it for a while.
I believe there are some public servants from New South Wales on the call today who also would not want to get off on mute, but who might have something to say. But I won't embarrass them here.
It was certainly a really interesting piece of work in looking at what is classified and not classified, and certainly the differences between states are quite stark, let alone the differences sometimes even within state departments. There is a federal definition. The federal definition is not universally applied, and things like carbon units, Pip, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about when you move from being a primary producer to an energy provider, for example. There are some recommendations in that paper that we would like to actually revive this year, because the work is a couple of years old now. A lot of it is still topical. There are some changes in the environment that we'd like to see updated. So hopefully we can bring some of that into future discussions as well. It's coming right up to 12 o'clock, and I know a lot of people will either have another meeting starting at 12, or they're just really keen to get to lunch, or if it's in another part of Australia, they've got the rest of the morning to get through. So thank you for the comments in there. We will be capturing all those. There was a question about the recording being distributed. We will make that available as well through the same channels as how you found the webinar in the first place. But we will actually wrap it up there if that's okay with everyone. But thank you all so much for joining, and thank you for your interest in this really important piece of work. And thank you very much to AgriFutures for making all this happen. Thanks everyone for joining us today.